Good morning, YouTube. Let's rock and roll. Everything's good. Sound is good. Got a new, well, whatever. All right, here we go.
And here we go.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is
Not merely peace in our time, but peace in all time.
I have no fear whatsoever of anybody or anything.
Did you think no one was watching?
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
your mission.
Suppose we go where no man has gone before.
To reclaim the American dream,
To be given the right of human beings to be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities. By any means necessary.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show. If you're hearing his voice, you're hearing the voice of reason.
You've certainly come to the right place.
Welcome. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. It is Monday, October 12th, 2015, and I am so glad that you decided to join us this morning. If you're joining us live or whether you're downloading the podcast after the fact, I want to thank you. It has been an eventful weekend. A lot of things happening in the news, new information on the Tamir Rice investigation, which we'll discuss first. Then I also want to talk about the Benghazi report, the investigator who claimed he was fired because he would not put an unwarranted amount of emphasis on Hillary Clinton versus the true investigation. So we'll discuss that. We're also going to discuss a couple of things with regard to Big Pharma, but I want to talk about another CEO from Big Pharma that has come out to basically let the world know that they're in this for the money. And I want to talk about that in the context of the bigger, broader 30,000 foot conversation, not so much the microcosm of his company, but the bigger conversation with regard to capitalism and the best interest of society. I want to talk about that. And then last but not least, I want to talk about the Justice or Else Million Man March 20th anniversary, Farrakhan. And I'm going to tell you why I really didn't care about it this weekend, just to be honest with you. Why I never ever really care about what Louis Farrakhan has to say. I'm going to put that up front and then discuss it all at the end, and hopefully you'll understand why I have absolutely no deference for Louis Farrakhan, black or not. I guess maybe I should talk about that at the top, but I won't. I'm going to eat my vegetables first before I get into all of the things that I really, really want to talk about. But first, let's talk about this Tamir Rice investigation. I couldn't really deal with it on yesterday, and I tell you why. Because it's Tamir Rice, the 12-year-old boy out of Ohio, Cleveland area, who was gunned down. If it had not been police officers, it would have been immediately described as a drive-by shooting. Within 2 seconds of the police officers coming on the scene, people have counted that down to it's only 2 seconds from the time the police cruiser entered the frame of the video and the time they got out and shot Tamir Rice, 12-year-old boy who was playing in a park with a gun that looked like a real gun. A lot of people are using that as a position to say this was justified because it looked like a real gun. But Ohio is an open carry state. And so if a person has a real gun in Ohio out in public, they are legit. They are within their legal right to do so. But that did not stop the police officers from killing within 2 seconds Tamir Rice, and likewise just entering on the scene, killing John Crawford. So on yesterday, when everyone was in the social media land dissecting the different things that happened, I actually had to unplug because it's just too much for me. I'm going to be honest with you. The Tamir Rice case, above all else, is too much for me because I have a 4-year-old son who's going to be 12 and who's going to be, grow up in this world, and to see other human beings do everything they could to contort every way they could to justify this police officer killing a 12-year-old boy within 2 seconds was just too much for me. I personally couldn't handle it, so I unplugged. I did read several articles on it this morning so that we could discuss it here. And of course, you all can join the conversation because maybe you have words that I don't have this morning. 857-600-0518 is the number that you can call. But in the Tamir Rice investigation, I put a link to the MSNBC article as well as to the AP article. AP is pretty straightforward, just gives you the facts. I like the MSNBC article because it goes into a lot more detail. But in the AP article, the lawyer for the family of the 12-year-old Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old boy handling a pellet gun who was fatally shot by Cleveland patrolmen, says reports finding that the shooting was justified show the prosecutor's office is avoiding accountability. And that's what this entire weekend is about. 2 reports came out from the prosecutor's office that these reports were from, quote unquote, independent investigators. And the investigators are now have returned findings that say that this shooting was justified in terms of the U.S. Constitution, the constitutionality of the shooting in terms of robbing Tamir of his life and his liberty. So they're basically saying he didn't do anything wrong. The police officer didn't do anything wrong with regard to constitutionality. This murks up the waters because we're not dealing with a federal case yet. We're dealing with a state case. There has already been a judge who has found probable cause to have the police officer arrested, but the prosecuting office, the district attorney, did not. He opted not to arrest the officer whose name maybe I shouldn't mention, just like I wouldn't mention the shooters in Oregon, and just like I won't mention the shooter in South Carolina. At least I'm going to try not to mention them. But I'm trying to approach this as calmly and measured as I can because it shows 2 things. Number one, I don't know, it probably shows more than 2 things, but I like to start with 2 things. Number one, it shows that whenever a police officer is involved in a shooting, prosecuting attorneys who are in bed with the police officers out of the necessity of their position, right? They have a relationship with police officers that goes beyond anything, they work hand in hand with the police department. Whenever there's a police involved shooting, we see far too often the prosecuting attorney behaving in a way that he or she would not behave if it's not a police officer involved. What we find is whenever we're dealing with a grand jury and a police officer involved shooting, we see prosecuting attorneys acting as if they were a defense attorney. And instead of bringing evidence so that there can be a trial, they bring evidence so that there will not be a trial. We saw this in Ferguson. When we see this now in Cleveland, Cuyahoga County. We see this because let's take Ferguson, for example. Ferguson, the district attorney, after the fact, admitted to putting up people that he knew was lying. He knew they were not being truthful. It just so happens that the person that he put up who was not being truthful was a person who corroborated Darren Wilson's testimony. And so we have seen unprecedented examples of district attorneys doing everything they can to never have to go to trial when it involves a police officer. When the normal course of the adversarial process of our justice system always pits the prosecuting attorney against the defendant, not in favor of the defendant. But whenever there's a police officer, we see that it is the exact opposite. And this is exactly what is happening in Cuyahoga County. We have a district attorney who went out and sought independent investigations, independent reports, not based on Ohio law, because it is a state case. He sought them based on the constitutionality of the shooting, which most people would tell you federal cases are that much more difficult to find guilt and culpability because those exact things, you're not looking at state regulations and state laws. You're looking at the constitutionality of something generally. I'm sure there's other frameworks that they can investigate under, but in this case, they just reported back the constitutionality of the shootings, saying that and then I'm going to get to the second thing, which is the most troubling and the thing that bothers me the most. Essentially saying that this officer was justified out of fear for his life or the fear of the safeties of others to pull up on the scene with Tamir Rice and 2 seconds later shoot Tamir Rice dead. And I think if I remember the report, I read a portion of the report saying that it's not a question of whether or not every officer would behave in this way. It's a question of whether or not this officer had a reasonable suspicion or a reasonable concern or reasonable fear. Which leads me to the second thing. It's bad enough that we see the systemic problems, because it is a systemic problem when you have a prosecuting attorney who is going to play the role of a defense attorney, which completely rewires the adversarial process that we have in the United States. And it intentionally does so whenever it is an incident of a police shooting. I can't say that's not categorically across the country, but in these high profile cases, we see that police officers have an advocate in the district attorney rather than an adversary in the district attorney. That's the systemic problem, number one. There's a second systemic problem that really bothers me the most, because it makes people with a skin complexion like me more vulnerable to this system than anyone else. It's the assumed guilt. It's the assumed belief of criminality of blackness. It's the assumed belief that this 12-year-old boy was older than what he looked, right? They said that he looked like he was 20 years old. A grown man. So, right, the interpretation of here's a child, but we see him as an adult. That's problem number one. Then two, in a state where you are allowed to carry a weapon, there is the assumption that this black person who is carrying a weapon, let's forget about it being a toy right now. Let's just call it a weapon. Here's a black person carrying a weapon publicly. In a state where it's legal to carry a weapon publicly, there's the automatic assumption that this black person who is doing something legal is doing something illegal, which triggered the 911 calls, not only for Tamir Rice, but also for John Crawford. The assumption that this black person with a gun is so much more dangerous in a state where it's legal to carry guns publicly. It's that instant assumption of guilt that leads to so many police killings. That is the underlying problem. That is the cultural problem. That is the societal problem that you can't really fix with legislation. You can't fix that with regulations. We can address the abdication of an adversarial conflict in the district attorney's office with legislation. That type of behavior should not occur, which is why when a police officer is involved in a shooting, there needs to be a special prosecutor assigned. That can be taken care of, because you should not have a prosecutor who is in bed with the police out of necessity of their responsibilities. You should not have them playing the defense attorney when their job is expressly to be the adversary, so that we can get to actual due process. That can be addressed with legislation. But the societal and the cultural problem of assuming that this black boy was actually a hulking barbarian 20-year-old with a weapon in a state that it is completely legal to carry weapons publicly. The assumption that this boy is guilty of something, is dangerous and is a threat, so we must call 911. Coupled with the assumption that that police officer made as soon as he rolled up, did not say halt, drop the gun, did not say put the gun down, did not say get on the ground. He opened up his door, car still rolling, pulled out his gun and shot Tamir Rice dead. There are a lot of assumptions that took place from the time Tamir Rice went outside to play. And those assumptions led directly to his death. And the reason I can't tolerate and deal with this today or yesterday is because you have these jackass of human beings who would rather do everything in their power to justify this shooting. instead of looking at the reality of every incorrect assumption that was made along the way that led to the death of an innocent 12-year-old boy playing with a toy gun. God forbid you play cops and robbers. Apparently, black people need to just play the robber role, because if you play the cop role with a weapon, you can get killed. Because of all of these assumptions that are made at different points, the people who are fearing for their lives. Why are you afraid of this little boy? Why are you assuming that this little boy is a 20-year-old when he's actually a 12-year-old? Why are you assuming that a boy carrying a gun, or a man carrying a gun in a state where it's legal to carry a gun, why are you assuming that he is a criminal and that he is dangerous? Why are you making all of these steps that now lead you to making a 911 call, which triggers an instant response by police officers who are automatically wired for violence? Let's just put that there. Police officers are automatically wired for violence. They are no longer being trained, at least we're not seeing the fruits of the training, to be keepers of the peace. And so now one assumption led to a 911 call. Another assumption led to this insane police officer to roll up on the scene and not ask a single damn question and shoot Tamir Rice. And you have people who would do anything they could to make Tamir Rice to be the criminal when he was just a 12-year-old child. And there is a direct correlation. Pardon me. There's a direct correlation between the political ideology and who is supporting who in this. There might even be a causal relationship, but I'm going to talk about the correlation, because you see so many right-wing conservatives, the same people who are screaming pro-life, the same people who are screaming gun rights, right? The same people who would tear this country up if someone told them they did not have the right to open carry. You see these same people justifying this shooting because this 12-year-old boy should not have ever had a gun that looked real, even though it was a toy, in a state where it's legal to carry real guns. And I guess the problem I have the most with it is that they don't see so many of us as human, because if they did, how can you look at a human 12-year-old child and forget about all the things that led to his wrongful death and try to vilify him for the sake of protecting this system, for the sake of never having to confront the reality that the system is absolutely screwed the hell up? And so that's why. And so these reports come out. And they say that the shooter was in, the police officer was justified within the terms of the Constitution. And they wrap this up, and they're going to present this to the grand jury as though it's an independent investigation, but it's already loaded. It's already tilted because it's not considering the evidence in the framework of Ohio state law. It's considering the framework of federal law, but this is a state case. And so they're bringing information that is completely biased. The intention of it is biased to make it so that they never have to go to trial on this case. And they wrap it all up and say justice was served. That is the insult to injury, that they will go through all of this so that they don't have to try this police officer. And then they're going to turn around and say justice was served. If you want to know the type of thing that will make me flip over tables, bust out windows, and lose my mind, it's when we take this justice system and we pervert justice and we turn around and shove it down the throats of Americans and say justice has been served, when it has been the exact opposite of justice, when it has been a gross miscarriage of justice. And that's why I'm speaking as calmly as I can today, because I have to talk about Farrakhan, and I can't betray what I'm going to say about his raggedy ass later on. Folks, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to take a break. When I come back, I'm going to deal with some other things. And then later on, I'm going to tackle Farrakhan and why I would never support him. This is the Benjamin Dixon Show. We'll be back after this.
When you're ready to lose weight, why count, track, and worry over every meal? Jenny Craig makes it simple. Just walk into a neighborhood Jenny Craig center or give us a call. You'll meet your dedicated personal consultant who helps you reach your goals. Together, you'll pick out delicious Jenny Craig foods that you'll love and design a menu that fits your life. And the best part is that you can get started losing weight right away. Don't wait any longer to take advantage of our best offer ever. Call 1-800-JENNY20 or visit jennycraig.com.
This is the sound of salmonella gyrating on your undercooked chicken. And it looks like Mom might be taking it out a little early. Don't let salmonella get funky with your chicken. On average, 1 in 6 Americans will get a foodborne illness this year. So use a thermometer to cook each type of meat to the right temperature. Keep your family safe at foodsafety.gov. Brought to you by the USDA, HHS, and the Ad Council.
On the next episode of Recipes for Disaster.
I'm making beef sliders for my friend Sandy. Nana taught me to always pull meat off the grill early so it's extra juicy.
Use a food thermometer to ensure ground beef is 160 degrees, or you could make people really sick. Sandy didn't think twice about the slider she ate until yoga class, when a nasty case of food poisoning turned her downward-facing dog into upward-moving lunch. Watch Recipes for Disaster at foodsafety.gov and learn the steps Maria unwittingly leaves out. Brought to you by the USDA, HHS, and the Ad Council.
When I grow up, I want to be a new pair of blue jeans.
When I grow up, I want to be a kid's first computer.
I want to be a bike that races around the country.
I want to be a bench on a forest trail.
When I grow up, I don't want to be a piece of garbage. And if you recycle me, I won't be.
Give your garbage another life. Recycle. Learn how at iwanttoberecycled.org. Brought to you by Keep America Beautiful and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to the Benjamin Dixon Show. If you're hearing his voice, you're hearing the voice of reason.
Welcome back. All right. I just to reiterate that Tamir Rice story of above all else, that one takes it out of me, man. That one just drains my soul. I have to tread on that very delicately, so that the rage in me doesn't come out. I'll be quite honest. You know, there are so many reasons, and I'm going to get to my next topic, but I want to say this. There are so many things that can make you angry in this world that are justifiable. It's justifiable anger. We have the right to be angry about these things. The only question is, what are you going to do with that anger? Do you let that anger control you and explode and to become destructive, which is not productive? But don't be fooled. Don't be fooled by my measured words, just like you shouldn't be fooled by your measured words and your tempered responses to issues, because there are issues that would trigger any of us to become out of character. Let's just say out of character. And this Tamir Rice case, above all else, more than Ferguson, even though there are traces of this exact systemic problem in Ferguson, more than John Crawford, even though this is almost the exact same scenario. It's the fact that this was a 12-year-old boy, and then to see people vilify him and make him out to be as much of a monster as possible, simply to justify and to protect the status quo, which allows a police officer to roll up on a black kid and shoot, or any kid for that matter, but this one is black, roll up on a black kid and shoot him in 2 seconds, and nobody misses a beat. You know what else makes me this angry? It's Sandy Hook Elementary. The fact that 20 kids, my children's age, can be killed. And you have people like Ben Carson, who says he has not seen a bullet hole body that is worth us revoking gun rights. Things like that should make you angry. and I was trying to cut up an interview I did with DeRay McKesson so I can splice it in my commercial breaks. And he reminded me, he said, the truth itself is damning. The truth itself should radicalize you. And the only difference between me and my rage and my anger, and yes, I'm an angry black man. Yes, I want to tear some shit up and burn some shit from time to time. The only difference between me and people who actually go out there and do it is that I know the effectiveness of, or let me rephrase that. I know how ineffective that journey is. I know that once you go down that road, you don't get anything done. You may scare the hell out of people. You may shake them up and say, oh, God, we have to do something. But at the end of the day, the only way things get done in America, unless you plan on overthrowing America, the only way things get done is if you work through this political system. That's the only difference between me. So I focus all of my angry black man syndrome, right? I focus all of that on what I believe to be the core problem. And the core problem are people who are trying to protect America's status quo, who are trying to conserve the status quo, who are trying to never make it so that we have to look at the systemic factors that lead to the justification of a police officer rolling up on a 12-year-old boy and in 2 seconds shooting him and he gets off. The people who are protecting that, they are the problem. And so that's why I put all of my energy there, instead of going out and tearing something up because you feel like doing that. But you have to ask yourself the question, is that going to yield the result? I'm a results-oriented guy. I almost told on myself. I almost identified my job. I'm going to move on, but I like to get shit done. All right, here we go. Let's go to this article on Valeant CEO, where he's basically saying that profit is more important than helping the sick. I'm pulling up that article now. The CEO, and it's important in this exact context. It is important. So we talked about 2 weeks ago about Martin Shkreli of Turing Pharmaceuticals. I can't remember the name of the drug. Forgive me, I can't remember the name of the drug, but the drug's purpose is to fight back a serious life-threatening infection. The drug is almost 80 years old, and he increased the price of that drug by 5,500%, from $13 to $750. Well, we thought that was pretty much it. He became the villain of the week, but a new CEO has come out and one-upped him. J. Michael Pearson, a CEO of Valeant Pharmaceuticals, has come out and expressly said that my primary responsibility is to Valeant shareholders. We can do anything we want to do. We will continue to make acquisitions. We will continue to move forward. Well, okay, so that in itself is not troubling, but when you see that he has taken a drug called Zegerid, and he has increased that by 550%. And over the last few years, he has taken 56 drugs he has acquired. They aren't developing new drugs, right? Companies that develop new drugs do have years of investment where they could spend almost $1 billion in research and development, and they need to recoup those costs. There's problems in that framework in itself, but at least it's justifiable in the sense that you've made an upfront investment of billions of dollars in a new drug. So you're going to charge enough money to make a profit as well as cover your expenses. Cool, right? But this guy, this J. Michael Pearson, acquired 56 drugs. He didn't research and develop 56 drugs. He acquired them, and he promptly raised the price of all of them. And then, of course, the Zegerig, whatever, was raised by 550%. And this is another quote. He said, if products are sort of mispriced and there's an opportunity, we will act appropriately in terms of doing what I assume our shareholders would like us to do. The problem is that you're pricing out people who need the drug, who had access to the drug before you acquired the drug. Right? We're not coming to you and saying you've developed a drug and you have to give it to us dirt cheap for the sake of poor people. No one is saying that. We're saying here is a drug that was affordable, that you did not develop. You acquired it, And for the sake of your shareholders, you raise the price to an exorbitant price such that the average American, who the average insurance program probably would not even cover it. And so, and I'm trying to find in this article where it says how much their stock price has raised over the last few years. I think it's raised by 1,000%. I want to get you the exact number. It's in here somewhere. Hang on, let me scroll. But the essence of it is that they have raised the stock value by 1,000%. And now that the Congress the investigative arm of Congress has subpoenaed their records as well as Scraley, and they're going to do an investigation of it. Well, the stock price has fallen by 27%, right? So, you know, if your entire focus is on stock value, then you become dangerous to the collective community of America, right? Every decision, and this is what I harp on, this is what I wrote about in my book, every decision that a business makes is not necessarily in the best interest of America. But so long as we allow business people and politicians to sell us this idea that everything that's good for business is good for America, then we will continue to see things like this, where a person is absolutely not gutting, what's the word? He's absolutely exploiting people who are at their most vulnerable and have no choice but to spend this money. I remember there was a young lady. She wasn't young. She was in her 80s, right? Phenomenal woman who was a member of my dad's church down in Florida. And she was just a class act, man. You ever met an old lady who was like, man, that's what I want my wife to be like when we get in our 80s, just classy woman. And she was, you wouldn't know it, but she was very sick. I don't know what the sickness was, nor would I say it even if I did, but I do know that she was taking a particular drug, and that drug cost her $1,000 per pill. Now, just so that I can make sure I cover my bases, it may have been a shot that she had to do. We're talking about 20 years ago now. It may have been a shot, and it was $1,000 per dose. And I remember my mother telling me about this, and she was discussing with the lady. She had to make the decision that I'm no longer going to pay this because it is undermining all of my life's work. She could afford it because she was an investor. She saved money. She owned properties. She was, you know, she could afford it. She could keep spending the money on it, but it was eating away at everything she would have left her children. And so she decided, I'm no longer going to pay this $1,000 per dose. I would say 2-3 weeks later, she died. These are the decisions that people are having to make. Now, I don't know what that drug was. It could have been with the original patent holder, trademark holder. Patent holder is the word. I said it right the first time. It could have been with the original pharmaceutical company that developed it and had billions of dollars of research and development that they needed to overcome. Could have been. But we're seeing this new trend where companies are acquiring old drugs, and they are raising the price to such an exorbitant level that people are having to make these types of decisions. We have to get away from this false narrative that everything business does is okay, because if it's okay for business, if it's okay for shareholders, if it raises the stock prices, then it's good for America. That is not true. That is not necessarily true. And I'm not falling into the false dichotomy that conservatives want to put up, right? That if you oppose this type of behavior, then you're anti-business, or that you hate corporations and you hate business people and you hate capitalists. No, I think that any business, any CEO is within their right to make decisions that are in the best interest of their shareholders. The CEO's job is not to do something great for society. The CEO's job is to make money, and they better do that because that's their job. What I'm saying is We as a collective body of civilized people need to make sure that our government is not simply falling in line with these things, because every CEO decision that is good for their business is not necessarily good for America. And the government, because it is we the people, it is America, should be doing things, ensuring that this entire economy, this entire American experience is for the benefit of the average American. Simply put, it's not the CEO's job to protect Americans. It is the government's job to protect Americans. We cannot expect the CEO to behave like a civilized human being when their entire job is about making profits. That doesn't make them evil. It makes them just great capitalists. Likewise, it is not the politician's job to protect every single decision a business person makes. There should be regulations. There should be limits. That we should put a framework that protects Americans around this entire capitalistic system. But we have been fooled for 35, well, for even longer than that. I often demarcate the Ronald Reagan revolution as a turning point, which it was. But we have been buying into this false narrative of the beauties and the virtues of capitalism for a long time, and saying that the government needs to get out of the way, when in reality, what we're seeing with Scraley and what we're seeing with J. Michael Pearson is the exact vice of capitalism. And if we don't have an institution that can protect Americans from the vices of capitalism, then we will forever be exposed to these forces that will always drive up prices as high as they possibly can, and always drive down the cost of labor as low as it can, so that they can maximize their profit. Does that make them evil? Some of them, yes, but in general, no. It just makes them slaves to capitalism. And the result of it is, here we are the victims of their pursuit for profit by any means. And all I'm saying in this entire segment is that if we do not elect officials who will stop being so impressed by the profit margin of these companies, because these country bumpkins have never been anywhere, never seen anything, never seen any real money. And so they get introduced to a diamond, what's his name, from Chase. They get introduced to all these people who are just flush with money, and they're so impressed, and they're so impressed by the donations that they're given, that they have turned not only the American government over to the wolves, they've turned the American people over to the wolves. We have to elect officials who are going to go in there and say, you want to make as much money as you can? Fine. But we're going to protect the American people. And by protecting the American people, we ensure that you will always have a pool of citizens that you can extract wealth from in the future. You have to protect capitalism from itself. Bottom line. I'm going to take another break. When we come back, we'll discuss the Million Man March, the Benghazi stuff, and Louis Farrakhan versus Malcolm X. We will be back after this. I want you to join the conversation, 857-600-0518. This is the Benjamin Dixon Show.
You're tuned in to the Benjamin Dixon Show. Join the conversation, 857-600-0518.
Looking for the right business opportunity? Need the right product, the right marketing plan, and the absolute best training in the world? Well, look no further. The Elite Team. Every leader in time excels. They believe the key ingredients in becoming successful in life and in business are just a keystroke away. Go to www.eliteteamsite.com. That's www.eliteteamsite.com. The Elite Team has a system in place that will move you closer to achieving your goals and dreams. Visit www.eliteteamsite.com or Tony Fleming Enterprise.
You've tuned in to the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Hey, no, no, All right. So a couple of interesting things have happened on the political front over the weekend. Jason Chaffetz, who was the chairman of the committee that was investigating Planned Parenthood, has finally admitted the thing that we all knew, that there was no wrongdoing involved with these videos and with Planned Parenthood in general. Okay, that's number one. Number two, the guy, Kevin McCarthy, I can't remember his first name, last name is McCarthy, who wanted to be the next Speaker of the House. He has since rescinded his nomination, and he's not running. Last week he admitted that, or 2 weeks ago, he admitted that the Benghazi investigation was completely about political purposes. And so as a result of that, the political fallout was such that he had to step down. But even more so this weekend, yesterday, there was an interview on CNN with a former investigator for the House Select Committee on Benghazi, who says that he was unlawfully fired in part because he sought to conduct a comprehensive probe into the Benghazi compound instead of just focusing on the Clinton State Department. And essentially, he said that that was one of the components. The other reason was that he feels he was fired because of the time he had to take off because he was a reserved. He was part of the Air Force Reserve. So he had to take off 39 days or something like that. And he feels like that was equated into it. I found it interesting. Just a side note that this guy, that he has a PhD in political science. So I don't know, just because I'm pursuing my PhD, I just kind of wanted to mention that. But he expose what we have already known, but from the position that he was not trying to not look at Hillary Clinton. He was trying to look holistically at everything that happened, but the committee itself did not want to look at everything that happened. They wanted to focus solely on Hillary Clinton. And one of the things that he said in an article before his interview on CNN was that, you know, he felt that this was going to always leave questions unanswered, especially for the families of the people who were killed. And I never really considered that they weren't doing a comprehensive investigation. I just always assumed that they have done an investigation and now they are just focusing on Hillary Clinton for political purposes, right? I made the foolish assumption that at the beginning, they actually did an investigation into what actually happened. But from what this guy is telling us, he was fired because they would not allow him to do a comprehensive investigation. In other words, they did not care what happened in Benghazi. They only cared about crucifying Hillary Clinton, which is not a surprise, right? I'm not saying that as though it's a matter of surprise. I'm saying that somewhat from an exasperated position that at what point can normal conservatives, just your average guy like me who happens to be on the right instead of the left, at what point do they not wake up and realize that their party has lost their minds, that there's really no redeeming value in their elected officials? The problem is that there are so many loud voices on the conservative right that feel as though they didn't go far enough with Benghazi. And I wonder what percentage of conservatives are even moved by the reality that a Republican leaning veteran who wanted to investigate this tragedy in its entirety was fired because he did not put sole focus on Hillary Clinton. At what point do they look at that and say, something's up with our elected officials? A friend of mine emailed me yesterday, just kind of exasperated again. He couldn't believe that Republicans still elect these people and give these people power. I believe it because Republicans gave these people power for this exact purpose. And as much as I would like to just lay this at the feet of their elected officials, the reality of it is their elected officials can't go far enough to satisfy the people that elected them. So this is not just a problem of politicians behaving badly. This is a problem of the conservative body politic behaving badly. So that now that even though Jason Chaffetz has said that Planned Parenthood has done nothing wrong, they're probably going to turn on Jason Chaffetz, even though he went all the way to the extremes of embarrassing himself with a chart that displayed data so erroneously that it's laughable. He went that far, but still, for a lot of conservatives, he didn't go far enough. John Boehner opposed President Obama at every single stop, but for the conservative voter, he didn't go far enough. This investigator wanted to put emphasis on he wanted to look at the entire Benghazi tragedy, but he didn't go far enough. I would love to lay this at the feet of conservative politicians so that I could convince or believe that I could convince conservatives that their politicians are bad. Therefore, you need to look at other political leaders. But the reality is, it's not just the politicians, it's the people who voted these people in, these politicians in. They are rabid. They are extremist is too easy. I'm trying to describe, if you're one of those people who believe that the Benghazi committee did not go far enough, that the Planned Parenthood committee did not go far enough, that and I'll leave John Boehner out of it because that's arguable, but Benghazi and Planned Parenthood did not go far enough. I think that you really need to take a step back and look at reality as well as your humanity, because something is not clicking right up here. And that's the best I can do with that one, folks. It's not just the politicians. It's not just Republican politicians. It is most assuredly the conservative voting base. I'm just thinking about it as I say it. All right, moving on. The Million Man March, Justice or Else, Louis Farrakhan, about, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands. You know, if I looked at that and looked at the pictures, you know, I'd say that looks like 1 million people, but I'm not a person who's good with measuring, right? It could be 500,000. I don't know how many people were there, but it was a beautiful sight. It was a beautiful sight to see so many African Americans coming into a place, coming to Washington to declare that we need justice, to declare that we are, you know, it was just a beautiful event in terms of the gathering of people. I'm not talking about in terms of what was said on stage. I'll talk about that in a minute. 20 years ago, when the Million Man March first took place, I was 15 and I was watching from home, and there was a lot of coverage. There was coverage almost on every single channel, live coverage, not reports after the fact, live coverage. And before I go down my tirade of why I would never support Louis Farrakhan and why I personally, he's one of the people I have probably harbor a lot of animosity towards. I'm just going to be honest with you. Before I go down that, let me just talk about the fact that there really was not a lot of coverage of this, not live. C-SPAN was the only channel that covered this live. Now, every other channel had something, news at 5, you know, they had their reports at, you know, and fine, you know, maybe they didn't want to cover it live because they didn't know what was going to be said as my camera goes in and out of focus. But I remember in 1995, when it happened, there was live coverage almost on every single channel because it was a significant event for no other reason than the numbers of people that showed up to Washington. And again, here we are with the same numbers, arguably the same numbers showing up to Washington, and one channel covered it live. If this had been, and I'm going to say the same thing everybody has been saying over social media because I can't disagree with what they said. If this had been a riot, if this had been even a protest, if this had been two black guys fighting on the train, there would be coverage that, there is no shortage of desire to display African Americans in a negative light, in my personal and professional estimation. Never is there a problem showing, but here are all these people in Washington gathered for a single purpose of solidarity, and one station could cover it. Not even BET didn't even cover it live. There you go. Not just Fox News. Forget about Fox News and CNN. BET did not cover it live, and that's because BET is not even owned by black people anymore. But I digress. That's what I can say. So what I'm getting ready to say is a very nuanced position. My position on the Million Man March on Saturday is very nuanced, because I think when you get that many people together in a place for a positive, for whatever, there should have been more coverage. I think it probably was a beautiful affair. You had celebrities, you had athletes, you had just your average Joes all coming together in one place. It was probably a very rewarding experience to attend. But I would never attend. I would never go. Why? Because I have absolutely no love, no support for Louis Farrakhan at all. Period. Done. For two reasons. And I'll tell you why. I always have two reasons. At least I'm not doing the 3-point sermons, 3 reasons for everything. No, I have 2 reasons that I don't have much love or respect or support for Louis Farrakhan. And I can, if you disagree with me, you are totally within your right to disagree with me, right? Because I can tell you, in a lot of regards, I'm not being the bigger person in this. Let me go back to the beginning. The Nation of Islam, the black version of Islam here in America, led by Louis Farrakhan, was responsible for taking away from us one of the most magnanimous leaders that the black community has ever known. Louis Farrakhan himself has confessed that he was a part of the reason. He created an environment that led to the death of Malcolm X. And when I look at who Malcolm X was, and who, more importantly, who he was emerging into, and I compare that to what we got stuck with Louis Farrakhan, every time I see that, I get angrier. I get angry because I don't need somebody. This is the reason I would never support Louis Farrakhan, is because I feel that he uses inflammatory rhetoric, incendiary language simply for promotion purposes, right? I could have 100,000 followers right now if I took my anger and use inflammatory words to stir up people who feel likewise. I don't do that because my desire is not to make you angry. My desire is to inform you and to mobilize thinking people, not angry people. And to see Louis Farrakhan year after year after year after year use inflammatory, incendiary, just provoking language, only to get on stage at the National Monument on Saturday to give a sermon, really to me says that all he wants to do is talk and make people angry for marketing purposes. Now, I already know the comments I'm going to get in the section from a lot of black people who are going to disagree with me and call me a coon and all these kind of things. Well, you know what? F you. I don't give a damn, because what I'm saying is true. One of the things that I hate the most is when you have an old person using violent language, and that violent language mobilizes a young person who isn't as mature in their thought process, and then they go out and do something violent. I see videos of a lot of old heads in the black community who are using inflammatory words, and they are not doing it themselves. They have mobilized a lot of young people who are angry, and they'll go out and they'll act on the language and the words that were fed to them by people like Louis Farrakhan. But you will never see Louis Farrakhan actually do anything that he says violently, or anything that it's just empty rhetoric. It's a lot of stirring up the audience. It's a lot of getting people to say amen. It's a lot of things, saying things that plays to the base level of humanity and making them angry. And my position is, if I'm going to be living with all of this anger, I need to do something about it. But because I'm smart and I see that you're not actually doing anything about it, you're not living up to your words. You're not starting this revolution. You're not going out and burning stuff down. All you're doing is provoking other people to go and do it, while you sit back and live in the lap of luxury that your dangerous words provide. Don't talk something that you cannot carry out. That's the bottom line. I will never provoke people to violence because I'm not going out to be violent myself, mainly, so that you understand, mainly because I know it's not effective. Mainly because I know it's not going to get us towards our goal. Mainly not because I'm such a moral person, because a lot of times my morality, I just set it aside and do what has to be done. But I'm smarter than that. I know that violent rhetoric will not get what we need done. So if you're not going to be about it, don't talk about it. That's number one. Well, that's number two. But the main reason I can't jump on board and would never support Louis Farrakhan is because we're stuck with him when we could have had Malcolm. We could have had Malcolm, who was just as angry as anyone else. But then he took a trip to Mecca and saw that the world was so much bigger than just being black. Yes, the world for him and for me and people like me, it does include this African-American experience in America, right? So we do calculate it. We don't set that aside. But when he went to Mecca, he saw Asian people who were believers like him. He saw white people who were Muslim like him, and it broadened his horizons and changed his entire perspective. And so we had this revolutionary, radical leader who had the fire of all of his oppression, but also had his eyes open to how big the world really was. And we're stuck with Louis Mother Farrakhan. I'm sorry. I never care what Farrakhan has to say on any given day of the week. You can leave your comments down there about why I'm a sellout. No, I'm just the type of person that if I'm going to say something, I'm going to do it. And because I know violence is not effective, I am never going to just provoke you with violence. And I absolutely hate to see people use violent rhetoric, violent imagery, and then not live up to it. I mean, come on, Farrakhan, all the stuff that you said, if you really lived up to it, you'd be in jail. So call me what you want to call. I don't care. But most of all, we lost because of Farrakhan and his jealousy of Malcolm X and the environment, the climate that he created. We lost this guy. Listen to him.
When I was on the pilgrimage, I had close contact with Muslims whose skin would in America be classified as white, and with Muslims who themselves would be classified as white in America. But these particular Muslims didn't call themselves white. They looked upon themselves as human beings, as part of the human family, and therefore they looked upon all other segments of the human family as part of that same family. Now, they had a different look or a different air or a different attitude than that which is reflected in the attitude of the man in America who calls himself white.
I think what a lot of people are interested in, Malcolm, is whether this experience has made you feel that your feelings have changed, that the animosity you have expressed in the past toward all whites.
There's one thing that I want to make clear. No matter how much respect, no matter how much recognition whites show toward me, as far as I'm concerned, as long as that same respect and recognition is not shown toward every one of our people in this country, it doesn't exist for me.
We declare our rank on this earth to be a man, to be a human being, to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in this society, on this earth, in this day, which we intend to bring into existence by any means necessary.
And until that moment comes, when we, the Americans, are able to accept the fact that on that continent we are trying to forge a new identity for which we need each other, that I am not a ward of America. I am one of the people who built the country. Until this moment.
And we are brothers. It's not a question of Jews or Christians or Muslims. We're all in the same boat.
We need each other.
Love is a condition so powerful. It may be that which holds the stars in the firmament.
Until this moment.
Love.
Until this moment.
Love.
Until this moment.
I come to you today to say that we can build a newer and better nation. I say we can do so, that we must do so, and that we will do so.
You've tuned in to The Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at www.thebenjamindixonshow.com.